Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, Glenn Garthwaite returns to the show for 1925's The Gold Rush.
Our guest today is the senior video editor for News 12 and also one of my, I guess, how do we put this, childhood comedy mentors, but do not hold that against him that I am not funny. That is not his fault. He tried his best. Glenn Garthwaite joins us today back on the show to talk about Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush. Glenn, thanks so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this a lot.
Yes, thank you for joining us, and we won't hold it against you that Mike turned out this unhumorous. And, not every teacher's perfect, obviously, and, it really all depends on the building blocks you're working with, and, Mike wasn't the best lump of clay, even though he's aged into a lump of clay, so that's, something.
Yes, but while I am relatively lumpy, in prep for this show, normally I do a costume. I dress up kind of in theme for the episode. This time, because Charlie Chaplin is so starved and gaunt, I'm going to say that I actually purposefully got food poisoning at the beginning of this week and have not eaten solid food in 4 days to more look appropriate to the film. I think that was my commitment to the bit, and I want some recognition for that. That's why I did it, to be clear.
Yes, that's the first thing people are going to think of when they see the footage of you. Not the glasses that make it look like you're about to investigate who killed JFK.
Tom, before you got on mic, I was just saying to Kyle, I'm annoyed. I don't have my regular glasses. I had to throw something else on. And Kyle seemed to indicate, no one is going to notice. No one is going to take notice of that. So thank you, Tom, for just...
Come on. If anyone's going to notice something sticking out with you to roast you to hell and back, it's going to be me.
Oh, goodness gracious. Glenn, thank you so much for coming on. We last had you on for the Battle of San Pietro. When was that? That was season 3. That wasn't that long ago.
That was season 3? I mean, they all blur together at this point.
I think so. That was pretty recent. So we had you on for the Battle of San Pietro, an alleged documentary where most of it was actually faked. And I have terrible news to break to you, Glenn. This film is also fictional.
I was aware.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you went in just based on the last one. We're like, well, I'm assuming this is just a true life documentary of the Klondike. And...
Stop reminding him that he couldn't make you funny. Just get to the point, you little bastard.
But Glenn, thank you.
I'm the bits guy. You're the homework boy. Let's go.
I'm a miserable homework boy. Glenn, it genuinely is true, because if you look, Glenn, on my letterbox, my last 4 watched are The Gold Rush, Projecting the Gold Presenting the Gold Rush, Chaplin Today, The Gold Rush, and Gold Rush 1942 version. And if you look at Tom's, it's just I don't know, The Town That Dreaded Sundown 5 or something.
It's my last 4 watch is The Gold Rush. I watched that today. Over the Edge, Deathstalker, and The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I mean, if that's not my last 4 watched to a T, I don't know what else could possibly sum my bullshit up more than those 4 movies.
So Tom really prepares, is what we're saying. But Glenn, first and foremost, what drew you to, when I sent you over the available films, what drew you to The Gold Rush? What was it about that you zeroed in on?
So the Attenborough film came out when I was, 11 or 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And it was my favorite movie. I had the VHS. I watched it over and over again. I had a poster of Downey dressed like the Tramp on my wall. So since I was a kid, I've been a Chaplin fan. Gold Rush was the first of his films that I saw. It's probably my favorite. Limelight being close second. So it was like a no-brainer when I saw the list. I was like, all right, I'm taking that one.
So in that, I mean, we've obviously talked about the Attenborough film, the Downey Jr. film on this show before. I think it came up a lot on our City Lights episode last season, because it is one of those fascinating kind of I don't know how to describe it. The Chaplin film, the Downey Chaplin film, is one of those fascinating things. If just because it feels as though, how do I put this? It feels as though when you watch that, feels like the last vestiges of a movie trying to reclaim Chaplin, if that makes sense. Like in terms of by the time when that movie was coming out, there were adults alive at that time, especially like, people's parents, grandparents, when that movie came out, who were like, oh, Charlie Chaplin, he was, I know he made some good films, but he was problematic with all the communist stuff and the so on and so forth. And like that film feels like it's like, really trying to go like, no, let's reclaim his legacy of, what happened. And now obviously, if you went up to somebody and you were like Charlie Chaplin, very rarely are you going to find somebody who goes, that damn commie. Like that's not really, for better,
right.
For all intents and purposes, like his legacy as one of the fundamental figures of film is so. It's in fact we talked about it on City Lights. His legacy as as a cinematic legend is so secure that now you almost feel cinephiles maybe overlook it in favor of kind of in the Chaplin Keaton debate, kind of like going so hard in the like, well, Keaton's the forgotten genius and this and that you almost now don't have, people kind of take it for granted.
Right.
The establishment
and I mean,
of Chaplin.
It's easy to do that when he, he's iconic. So when you have that stature, it makes sense that you would have people saying, well, really Keaton is the better one. But I mean, up for debate.
And I'm gonna say, Tom, you brought this up on our last episode, and I know that Tom's usual response is going to be, I don't remember doing that. But
I can't wait to hear what I said.
But
I'm sure it was a great salient point. I'm a smart guy.
Well, you Tom, we're talking about your own kind of journey of like, you started out as being somebody that was more of a Keaton guy than a Chaplin guy. Because Chaplin's films had picked up a reputation of being very sentimental and very kind of, some people call it schmaltzy compared to like Keaton's just straight bits. But that now, more recently, that's kind of what's flipped you toward Chaplin, is the idea of like seeing how much heart those have.
Well, yeah, I think I had the same. I fall into what pretty much happened with his legacy over the last 10, 15, 20 years, whatever you want to put it, of just I think the film world and film in general got very ironic and pushed earnestness and sincerity to the side, which Chaplin mainly deals in. Yeah, he's got the stunts and everything, and the great pratfalls and gags and whatnot, but it's all about the heart, The Kid is obviously one of the iconic, heartwarming, movies ever made. And with Keaton, there's none of that. With Keaton, you've just basically got anarchy and kind of like the purity of what Jackie Chan was doing in the 80s in Hong Kong. Just, the stories, they don't really matter. Because like we talked about it in the episode on the general, it's like, do people remember that this is a pro-Confederate movie? I don't think they do. Because you're not really watching Keaton for the stories. He's just like this dopey looking guy, and he's going to do like some crazy shit. And you're just like, that's amazing. This guy, broke his ass bone and he didn't realize it for like 20 years or whatever. And you go, that's amazing. But I do think as time has gone on, and just with me in general growing with my film fandom, is that I've come to appreciate Chaplin more for the earnestness and honestly for the greater sense of just storytelling craft. even if this isn't like his best movie in terms of like storytelling, there's at least an attempt to have like a story and build up and payoff and all of that. That honestly, as much as I still enjoy Keaton. Don't get me wrong, but it's just not there. With Keaton, the juice is the stunts. With Chaplin, it's about the whole package, the whole picture.
And that contrast couldn't be better than in this case because, Glenn, have you ever seen The Frozen North, the Buster Keaton short?
I have not.
So about 3 years before the Gold Rush, Buster Keaton made a kind of Klondike set movie called The Frozen North. It's a 17-minute short that is meant as a parody of William S. Hart Westerns of the time, because there's a whole thing about William S. Hart and Roscoe Arbuckle. I don't know. Listen, spoilers for our listeners. I may talk about this more later during another segment of the show. Wink, wink. But in that, to just contrast it, so the Gold Rush, Charlie Chaplin's snowbound comedy, is about love and about connection. In The Frozen North, within the first 5 minutes, Buster Keaton murders 2 people.
Okay, see, now you're making it hard for me to stay on the pro Chaplin side.
In fairness,
because that's fantastic.
Full disclosure, talking about the homework guy, Tom, I did specifically text you 2 days ago and go, you should watch this.
Yeah, but I had to watch Deathstalker.
Yeah, you had to 10 hats for a mule. But in this case, and it's not only he kills 2 people, it's basically he shows up, he walks in this snowy cabin, right? So it's Buster Keaton as whatever his character is, walks into the snowy cabin, and obviously he sees a woman by the fireplace, right? Woman by the fireplace, and a man seducing her, right? And he's just come home, and he's horrified at this sight. And we see him clutching his chest, and a tear falling down his cheek, right? He's watching his wife be seduced by another man, so he does the only thing that a man of the Yukon can do. He picks up his rifle, and he shoots them both dead. And then he looks at them, and he goes, oh, this isn't my house, and then leaves. And then goes home to his actual life.
That's fantastic.
It's
that's
so
awesome.
Dark. It's so So just
I'm not gonna lie, that's
a stark contrast of the two.
Not gonna lie, that is funnier than anything in this movie. Like that is a great joke.
I gotta
shit.
be real. I feel like if somebody needed to describe the dynamic of this podcast, they would represent me with the dinner roll dance, and they'd represent Tom with Buster Keaton blowing 2 people away and realizing he doesn't know them. That's about the best way to sum up this show.
Pretty much, yeah.
The dinner roll dance is so iconic that not only is it like the most memorable scene from that film, it's the most memorable scene from the biopic.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And like, what is he even doing? I don't know. It's magic.
And it's crazy because the funniest thing is that it's not the first time that bit is done on film. So the dinner roll scene, and then we'll get into the register, but I do want to talk dinner roll scene for a little bit, and we'll do more dinner roll talk later, but I love this. So multiple scholars, depending on what you can read about it. I've got a couple of books here that get into this. The Criterion gets into this. So this bit, the dinner roll dance, was likely created on the Mack Sennett lot, back when Chaplin and Roscoe Arbuckle and all of them were all working together. And depending on who you ask, either Roscoe and Chaplin came up with it together, or one of them came up with it and the other tried to say they did. I mean, truly, you can read so many versions of this. It genuinely feels like the fish stick episode of South Park, where it's like sometimes it's we came up with this together, other times it's look what I did, haha, and later it's like Chaplin does a little dance and then Roscoe goes, oh my god, robots. It's really like it's every version of it. But Roscoe is the first person to do the dinner roll dance on film. Roscoe, better known as Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe does it in a film, I believe, called The Rough House in 1917. So he does it the first on film. And that is well known. Right? Everybody's aware of that. However, everybody just doesn't care. You listen to any scholar or read any scholar, and they all just kind of go like, technically, Roscoe was the first person to do the dinner roll dance, but Chaplin perfected it. Or this, and it's genuinely very funny and you can watch the clip, and it does kind of suck. It is just like Roscoe with a deadpan face, just doing like kicks, and it's just
a lot of those Senate films, not great.
They are, yeah. There are, especially because some of them too, like, because I think it's Harold Lloyd has his character, his pre-glasses guy character with Mac Sennett that I forget the name of. I don't know. He's like a Chaplin knockoff, and I watched a bunch of those. I watched the majority of those before we did our first Harold Lloyd episode back in season 2, and boy, howdy, are a lot of them just really relying on a single gag, and that's about it. It's no disrespect to Max Sennett. Foundation.
Nah, fuck him.
I watched all of them in preparation for this. I re-went through all of them.
Wow.
And there's like, I don't know, like I think Chaplin's made like 80 something films.
Yeah.
They really don't get great until, I mean, I think he made like 52 films in 1914.
Yep. Yeah.
Is that a lot? I don't know.
Yeah. Honestly, the very first one that the Tramp ever appears in is probably my favorite.
Kid Auto Races at Venice. Yeah.
It's amazing.
In the registry. It only got in like 3 years ago, but that is in the registry. So,
So at least one of us will be dead when it's time to cover that episode.
It is always fun when people are like, "Oh, that just got into the registry. Can I do it on the show?" And I'm like, "Well, we're in season 4 now, and that would be season 36. So we'll let you know. We'll give you a call."
Well, we'll keep tabs.
Thus far, we don't have anything booked out. I shouldn't say that. There is one episode in a season 30 of the podcast that has been booked out already. Unsurprisingly, it's Patrick Cotner. We allow him to break the show. It just happens. It's chaos anytime.
Of course.
But no, you're right about the Max Sennett film. Speaking of with the Downey film, Glenn, can you think of Max Sennett without picturing Dan Aykroyd?
I don't even know what he looked like.
He's just Dan Aykroyd.
Yes.
That is a movie. We talked about it on City Lights. So for the listener, I apologize for repeating it, but it is insane how many people are in that Chaplin movie.
The cast is bonkers.
Attenborough, people kind of forget he was just one of those directors back then where it's just like, because he made Gandhi, so everyone's just like, oh, like we're gonna do whatever he does, we're gonna show up for it and get our Oscar.
Well, and it's
like, oh, okay.
But it's also like some of the people who you're like, right, this is the only period of time where blank would be in a prestige biopic, where you're like, right, at this point, Aykroyd is only a few years shy of an Oscar nomination for Driving Miss Daisy. Like, that makes sense that he's in this right now, and it's not happening again.
When are we getting Driving Miss Daisy Afterlife?
But I'm saying, like, Mila Jovovich, you're like, right, this was that window where they were like, I guess you're a prestige actress? I can't see you fighting Resident Evil zombies, so I guess, they got her before
she became Paul W.S. Anderson's main character, and she does nothing else other than his movies.
Which
that brief window before she got married, and
wonderful stuff.
Damn shame.
But yes, anyway, no, you're 100% right about the Max Sennett comedies, and that's kind of, I mean, that's the other interesting thing about the Gold Rush too, which I think we're going to get into. It's not technically Chaplin's first feature, right? You could call that Shoulder Arms. You could call that The Kid. Obviously, before this, he does A Woman in Paris. But it does feel like the Gold Rush is kind of that. It's the point where absolutely everything comes together.
100%.
It's kind of like this is going to be something that is only going to play to the people on this camera. But The Kid could be your Welcome to Asbury Park, if you will. But like the Gold Rush is the Born to Run that just sort of kicks off this hot run of like, oh, everything after this is unimpeachable. This and onward, everything hits.
I wish that Edna could have been in it and And you obviously that went south in a hurry, but she did so many films with him, and then to not make the features. Well, a Woman in Paris, but the great ones.
I feel like I'm the odd man out here because I don't think this is his Born to Run. I think this is more like his, I don't know, fucking Human Touch. It's like, it's good, Bruce, it's good. Yeah, but like, I don't know if this is the best, if this is your best fucking track in the world. I mean, hey, you did Streets to Philadelphia, so 90s weren't that bad for you, but honestly, I'll just get it out of the way. I think the thing that really holds this back for me in a lot of ways is the love story stuff. I really think it's not good. Everything else is great. I love him and the big fat trapper, the gold miner, and the criminal. I love that the criminal just immediately dies in an avalanche. It's just like, fuck you, idiot. The house stuff at the end, great. Love that. I just didn't give a shit about the love story. Like I was checking out. So like when you're talking about the dance, the little potato fork dance thing, I checked out. I was like, oh, come on. Okay.
Well, I mean,
that's just me. I'm just going off your comparison.
Well, I think it's important to remember, like, number one, the dinner roll dance is a dream sequence, right? It's
No, I know.
No, I'm just saying. Like, but the other thing too is Chaplin sort of agrees with you, insofar as
I think it's his best film. Yeah. It's my favorite one.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's his best.
Well, I mean, when I'm talking about the romance in particular, Chaplin agrees with Tom in some sense because obviously between the 1925 cut and the 1942 cut, he cuts that down drastically.
Oh, he could have cut out a lot more, buddy.
Okay. The letter that he writes, the whole subplot about him mistaking the letter, he just nixes that.
Mm-hmm.
He loves to misunderstand.
Yeah, but in this, he changes the letter. In the 42, the sound version, right, that he dubs over, he takes out stuff. He changes the letter writing thing so that there's no mistaken identity or anything. It's just her writing letters saying, I'm sorry I couldn't come to the party. And he just cuts the kiss at the end. There's no kissing sequence in front of the photo camera. He cuts down the storyline. Yeah, it's weird.
It's weird to see the tramp kiss somebody.
Yeah. It's
like the rare happy ending too.
It is, and also, it's even weirder when you watch it and you're like, oh, you're kissing this woman who you either are about to, depending on when you shot this, are about to or already have left your pregnant underage wife for. So that's cool, Chuck. That's a good call.
I made a note when I was rewatching this that it's interesting that the tramp as a character tends to be sort of sensitive to and supportive of women, but Chaplin himself,
he's
bad husband would be putting it politely.
It's very
well. Listen, I mean, can you really expect every pedophile to be a polite man to women? I think that's they just go hand in hand.
It's so funny though when you say that because before I rewatched it today, I was down a completely different rabbit hole, and I will probably trim this down in the edit, and then we'll play that Reggie clip. But so last night I was just browsing. I was feeling a little not great. I was browsing, and YouTube algorithm suggested to me a clip of when Corey Feldman was on the Howard Stern show in 1992. Performing "What's Up with Youth." We all remember the song "What's Up with Youth." We all know it, and that caused me to kind of like my significant other was like, "What are you watching?" And I was like, "What's it?" Corey Feldman performing his music, and she goes, "Oh, he did music?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "Okay, is it fine?" And I'm like, "We have to get into this." So that sent her and I this morning down the rabbit hole of Corey Feldman and his Angels, right? And we found this Hollywood Reporter interview from like 4 or 5 years ago. You guys know Corey Feldman's backup band, The Angels? Are we familiar with this?
No.
Okay, great. So anytime he performs...
I should have said yes.
He dresses like Michael Jackson. Yeah. That's about as far
I realized immediately I should have said yes, but now we're going to get an explanation.
Anytime he performs, his band is all women, and they are all like young blonde women dressed as Victoria's Secret angels. And the Hollywood Reporter decided to ask him about this. And they're like, Corey, what's this about? And he goes, well, it's part of a charity organization that I have called Corey's Angels. What we do is we take young women who are down on their luck, and we provide them mentorship, and we try and guide them and mold them. So because there's a lot of people out there who are terrible to women, and this is about protecting women. And they press him and they go, okay, you keep saying we. Who's the we? Well, it's me and my wife, and but we have some other people too. Okay, where do they live? Well, they don't have to live with me, but like if they don't have a place to stay, like they live with me. I want to be clear, like they don't have to sleep with me. Okay, nobody has to sleep with me. And this reporter just keeps pressing him. They're like, okay, is there an age limit for the angels? And is there an age limit? And he goes, look, I'm not in favor of prostitution. Okay. Anyway, 18 is the age limit. And it's like one of those things. And I only say that because after going through that whole interview, I then put on the Gold Rush and I was like reading about Chaplin, and like he was really interested in like finding talent, and he was finding all of these, talent. And I just kept thinking of just like Charlie Chaplin's voice going, the little tramp, and he discovers a young girl at the dance hall. But I'm not a fan of prostitution, to be clear. I'm just finding people who need a hand. They can live with me, but they don't have to. It was very much like an odd thing of kind of like, you try, especially when you're like a film history buff and all that, you try to kind of go like, well, you have to put this in the context of the time. But just contrasting that interview with reviewing the championship, like, people knew this.
Would it have been grosser? Would it have been grosser if he just said, as long as their feet touch the floor when they're in a chair, then it's okay?
That is...
Because then it's like, okay, at least you're being upfront that you're a creep. This weird, like... But no, I'm not into prostitution. No, they don't have to do anything.
He also clarifies he's not a fan of stripping. He thinks that's degrading. It's an insane interview, is what I'm saying. But anyway, I only bring that up because as we're talking about...
The walls of his house have seen nightmares.
I only bring that up in the context of Chaplin because it is one of those things, especially with this film, right? You do find out, like, the woman who was supposed to star in it, who had been in The Kid, right? Lita Gray, who was, I think, 12 at the time of The Kid, 15 at the time of The Gold Rush. The only reason she does not star in this film is he had gotten her pregnant.
She had homework?
He had gotten her pregnant. And so instead of having her star in the film, he had to marry her because she insisted on marriage rather than having an abortion. So he married her, and that's why he cast...
She's what, 15?
15 or 16, depending on what you read, yeah.
Awesome.
So he then casts Georgia Hale, who had just come off of a Joseph von Sternberg film. He cast Georgia Hale in the role. And then it gets a little bit worse because when the child is born...
Oh, does it?
When the child is born, Chaplin was convinced that this was actually going to damage his reputation when he had this big film coming out, and he didn't want it to affect the film. Because The Gold Rush would go on to become like one of the most successful silent films of all time. So he allegedly bribed the doctor to change the date on the baby's birth certificate to 2 days after the film's premiere date. When his underage wife eventually divorces him, because of course he had lost interest in her in favor of Georgia Hale, the star of this film. When she divorces him, it was such a massive financial windfall that for her that the papers reportedly called the divorce the second Gold Rush. So,
I mean, hey, sometimes the headlines write themselves. What can you say?
So,
I mean, that sounds like the beginning of The Omen. Like that's just like
it's
fuck. Yeah. I don't like this man.
Yeah, it's a little. It's one of those things that's just a little weird, but it is just fascinating to contrast that with. So this is the film he makes in 1925, right? And then when he revisits it in 1942, he adds this sound monologue, but he also reduces the romance. He takes out that kiss at the end. There is a bit of like. I don't know, you knowing the story of the behind the scenes and how chaotic the Gold Rush was in his personal life and everything, it is fascinating to think about the fact that this is the one film of his that he sort of goes back and re-edits. I can't think of a better comparison than to say special edition style, but he goes back and re-edits with, a decade plus of distance, and to consider
Yeah,
what a
'cause-
different person he is then and all of that. It's a fascinating thing to look at through that prism as well. Like,
Yeah, because it's like, what, 20, 25 minutes shorter?
I think the 25 is 88 minutes, and I think the 42 version is like 75 or something.
I think it's 72. So it's about 15, 16 minutes shorter, which is a good chunk of the movie. You're not getting all of that just cutting out like the title cards. What was he by 42? What was he on? His like sixth or seventh wife at the time, and he was not really interested in remembering going through the child bride divorce section of his life.
It was and not to mention, the other thing to consider is that when he makes The Gold Rush, it's kind of his first movie for United Artists, right? So not technically, because A Woman in Paris gets distributed by United Artists. His other features, The Pilgrim, The Kid, those are distributed by First National. United Artists, which he creates with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, that they release A Woman in Paris, but A Woman in Paris is a financial disappointment. And also, it's not a Charlie Chaplin comedy, right? He's not the lead in it.
Not really a comedy at all.
No, that's what I was saying. He's not the lead in it. It's not comedy. So much so that
there's like a
that is Tom. I assume you've not seen A Woman in Paris, right?
I have not. No.
One of the craziest things, in a weird way, is that the movie starts, as Glenn indicated, with a title card that he says is a disclaimer that just says, something like, "To give full transparency and honesty to the audience, I should inform them that though I, Charles Chaplin, have directed this picture, it is not a comedy, and I do not appear within the film. Enjoy." And it's like, man, couple things with that. One, you should have told people that before this point. And two, you're not starting out on a strong foot for anybody who didn't know that. It's a weird way to go about
that is amazing.
It really is.
So that's, this is technically the first like Charlie Chaplin led film to come for the United Artists. By the time he does the re-edit in 1942, he is the only one of the United Artists founders who is still making films.
True.
Pickford's retired. Fairbanks by 42 is either dead or about to be. D.W. Griffith isn't doing anything. And it's just fascinating to think, and not to mention, obviously, silent pictures are out of fashion can be at that point. I just think that is something really interesting, that not only does he go back and choose this one to do, it was a huge hit, but he does this one, but that there does seem to be something not just personal within The Gold Rush, the 1925 original, which is, of course, while it's a set in the, the Klondike and all that, a lot of it is him reflecting on his own experiences in poverty and, having been a child without food and all of that. So it's from a personal place there, but then seeing what he does in the re-edit and that other form of personal expression, I think it's just a fascinating thing in that regard.
Well, it's just it's interesting when you think, anytime you talk about filmmakers, especially when they're very auteuristic, like Chaplin is. This may not be his first movie or anything, but the way we're talking about it, it's like almost like you can count it as his first like big breakout, kind of like the first Chaplin movie in a sense. And how so many directors have just this bug up their ass about like their first movie or their breakthrough movie. Like you mentioned it before with the special edition. Lucas didn't just do it with the Star Wars. He did it to THX. He's done it to American Graffiti. But like, Coppola's doing it now. If Scorsese was given the opportunity, I'm sure he did it on Mean Streets with the 4K. He recolor timed it. You know, there's just something about like the first or the breakthrough with these filmmakers where they just Gareth Evans just did it with The Raid. There's always just something like, oh, I didn't know as much as I did at the time. I've learned so much more craft wise, just as a human being. I see things differently now. And, you know, everything we've brought up already makes this a pretty clear case that he was definitely thinking differently in 1942 than he was when he originally made this movie. And it must have been bugging him, the 15 years in between. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's filmmakers are a weird bunch. Thankfully, not all of them are pedophiles, unlike what your aunts and uncles at Thanksgiving would like to tell you.
I agree that this is sort of like a first in a way. And he made great films before this, but this seems to be like the first one with like a grand vision in a way. Honestly, I'm not sure that any of his other films are quite as visually arresting as this one. There's moments, but
there's a scope. There's a scope to this movie that you don't get in his other ones. They're very studio, like on a set, and it's a street corner. Oh, he's in a warehouse or whatever. This is, for all intents and purposes, this is a Western, and it looks great. You can't knock it for that.
And a visual effects movie, like pioneering visual effects for its time.
Yeah, I love when that little toy Charlie Chaplin busts out of the door, and when the house is, I'm just like, oh look, it's a little action figure, man. That's a great effect.
I really like how a lot of the physical comedy in this film is what's the word? It's like it's a part of the film in a different way. It's not just like I'm kicking a guy in his ass.
Yeah.
He's like being blown over in the wind, or obviously the whole ending with the house on the cliff. It seems like he's being really creative with his tools in ways that he hadn't been before.
What you're seeing with this film, and it's something that you see the other silent icons start to do, or the comedy start to do in time. It's something we saw Harold Lloyd do with The Freshman, which is, and we talked about it when we did The Freshman, which is, a lot of these silent comedy stars, because they came out of doing shorts, right? That was where they started. They would just show up on set and come up with bits, right? A lot of, Lloyd's films, Keaton's films were like, listen, we're going to pick a spot, we're going to show up, we're going to come up with some stuff, and we're going to stitch together and see if it makes a movie, right? What you see with The Gold Rush is that it's the first one where Chaplin starts from a story, as opposed to, what happened with like The Kid, where he had an idea for a premise and then just sort of shows up and goes like, what can we do today? And like, I'll put it together, right? And we'll make it into something. Here, he started from a story place and started building the scenes around the story. And I know that like for a lot of folks listening, that's so obviously how we all create things now that it seems odd to say that, right? That's just how films are made, is you come up with a plot and a story and then you build the film around it. But in this case, like, that is what you really see here. So, Glenn, what you're describing about like the way that even the action beats and the comedy beats kind of are so creative, kind of come out of what becomes these comedians' tools in a way, is like, well, what fun can we have with this particular setting or this particular moment? The brilliance that ends up getting lifted by Chuck Jones for every Looney Tunes bit, the chicken. That was, at one point supposed to be like, oh, well, he just imagines a chicken, right? Big Jim just imagines a chicken. And then Chaplin decided, like, what would be funnier if it was a chicken costume, right? Like, because imagine a chicken costume in that cabin and in that moment, right? And it can pay off. And so he kind of comes up with this bit building off of a very real idea in the film. They're supposed to be hungry, hallucinate. That's going to get me out of... it's not just a matter of, oh, well, it's like, well, that gets me out of the cabin for a bit, that gets me over here. It's a little more built into the plot. A thing I love too is that Chaplin is in the suit because he determined that if somebody else was in the suit, the chicken didn't walk like the tramp would.
Mhm.
And I got to tell you guys, I've seen The Gold Rush a million times. I have been watching The Gold Rush, probably, Glenn, for as long as I've known you. Like, I've been seeing this film. The fucking chicken suit still makes me laugh, catches me off guard, not because I've forgotten the bit happens, but I always forget it looks like that. You know, I'm just never prepared for quite how the chicken suit looks when it pops up.
I love how when he realizes that Big Jim is seeing him as a chicken, he very nonchalantly takes the knife and goes and hides it under the mattress.
Yeah.
There's so many little
Yes.
things. But this is the second time we've mentioned Big Jim, by the way, and I just want to say, Max Swain is awesome in this movie. And having just watched all those Senate films, he's in a bunch of them as Ambrose.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really cool to see him in this movie, just like giving a tour de force performance after watching him in those Senate shorts where he's just kind of like a bumbling oaf. So I really enjoy him in this movie.
Yeah, he's great. Big Jim, very apt title for the character. He's definitely a big boy, so kudos to honest naming in this movie. Yeah, the chicken suit scene's great. I mean, it's like you said, it's very Looney Tunes. And yeah, like Glenn said, it's the little things, hiding the knife. My favorite little thing in the movie is when they're cutting the deck of cards to see who's going to go out to go for the food, and the tramp picks the 3, and he just throws the cards down. He just gets so pissed off.
But he
goes in and gets his hat.
He gets the hat. Then the guy draws the 2, and he pulls the Abe Simpson in the brothel, where he just puts it on, and as soon as he sees it, just takes it out.
Yeah. No, it's just the physicality of him. He's just so if it was like today, he would just be like, motherfucker, and he'd just be like, goddamn cocksucker, son of a bitch. That's good luck to you. Good luck to you. Great stuff. Love it. Love all of it.
Now, this is normally the point where I'd say, well, before we talk anything about the Gold Rush, but we've talked about the Gold Rush, so I'll just say, before we talk any more about what we think about Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush, let's hear what the Library of Congress had to say. Here's what the National Film Registry had to say about Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush.
Written, directed, and produced by Charles Chaplin, The Gold Rush follows Chaplin's lone prospector on his adventures in the Klondike. Often considered one of Chaplin's greatest films, The Gold Rush features many now famous sequences, including Chaplin's Oceana Roll dance, and the scene in which the lone prospector and his fellow prospector, Big Jim McKay, played by Max Swain, are forced to eat a shoe to survive. In 1942, Chaplin re-released The Gold Rush with music and narrative soundtracks. The re-release was nominated for 2 Academy Awards, one for sound recording and another for music score of a dramatic or comedy picture. Charles Chaplin is known to have said that The Gold Rush was the film by which he wanted to be remembered.
All right, so now we play the game. Will Tom remember that she spoiled the Academy Awards question in the statement? I'm feeling good about my chances tonight, boys.
So I will say on the registry statement, and this is a minor thing. This is a personal thing. I'm a big film history buff. We've been doing this show for almost 100 episodes now, and Lord knows I've done plenty of other podcasts, written plenty of articles on film history. So this is just a personal thing. I understand that the man's name is Charles Chaplin. I understand that he probably would have preferred in his day-to-day to be called Charles Chaplin. It irks me to all hell for whatever reason anytime somebody calls him Charles. My brain just goes, no. What are we doing here? Charles Chaplin sounds like a completely different person. I'm so used to Charlie Chaplin that anytime somebody says Charles, I'm just like, who are we talking about here? It's a very...
And he's credited as Charles in like a majority.
I know, but I'm so used to, for whatever reason, like the name Charlie Chaplin has permeated the culture so much that anytime you hear something else, it's almost like when you go back to like early movies he did the score for and you see the credit Johnny Williams. You're like, somebody should go back and re-edit this. It's distressing. It's just, you don't call him Johnny. That's not who this is.
Oh, those freewheeling 60s and 70s where we call them Johnny. Hey, Johnny, you got some music for our picture, baby.
It's kind of like when you go back to like a very early film of hers and they're like, well, of course, with Bobo Bates. You're like, that's Kathy. It's Kathy Bates. What are we doing here? Yeah, her early films, she was I think she was a folk singer. And I think if you go back, Glenn, to Milos Forman, I think one of his early films is called Taking Off, right? And she's in it as a folk singer, credited under the name Bobo Bates.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like the name of a monkey you see at a fucking street fair.
100%. That is Bobo Bates did co-star with Ronald Reagan in a movie. That is 100%.
You had to bring him up every time you get a chance.
It's a fascinating thing. I just sent Tom, Glenn, I found a full list of every movie that Ron and Nancy Reagan viewed while they were in the White House because they had to keep records of this. And just looking at it and just imagining him watching some of those movies. Like I said to Tom, David Lynch's Dune is on the list. Ron and Nancy Reagan watched Lynch's Dune at the White House.
Easy.
What was that conversation like?
That conversation was like, well, that's why we're not going to help those dirty Afghanis once we get the Soviets out.
Truly,
I see what they do.
He's just on the phone. He's on the phone with Kissinger, just going like, could this happen? Is that real? Are there giant worms over there?
So I hear
they use pugs as weapons? Is that how this works?
I hear they call Osama bin Laden Lisan al-Gaib.
What? I love your sense of timeline for the Gulf, Tom. In any event, with the Gold Rush, right, and on that, they do say that that is Chaplin. That is the film that he wanted to be remembered by, which I think is, I mean, that does explain the re-edit and why this is the one he seeks to re-edit. Even though I thought this was interesting, one thing I hadn't realized, this is the only one that gets like a full sound re-edit. There are others like the Chaplin Review, which stitches together, I think, Shoulder Arms, A Dog's Life, and there's one other I'm forgetting, into like a feature with voiceover. One thing I didn't realize was that James Agee, the great film scholar, wrote a review of the 1942 Gold Rush when it came out, which is very funny to read in a number of ways, because one thing is he talks about, in 1942, with the 42 Gold Rush, he remarks on it going, finally, the next generation of children can have their Chaplin comedy. Which is a weird thing to read and just think about, like, the idea of, like, yes, that he was our guy back in 25, but now these spry young 1942 children can have a Chaplin of their own. But he also indicates at the end of that review that he's like, well, I'm aware that Chaplin has plans to re-edit The Circus just like this, if this one is financially successful. And that obviously never came to pass. So I just find that interesting that, like, at the time it seems to be like, oh, he's going to do this with a bunch of them. And then, like, obviously for a number of reasons that doesn't come to pass.
Do we know when he said that this was the film he wished he'd be remembered for? I find that surprising. Just because he made a bunch after that really seem like they come very personal for him. Like they're statement films.
I wonder, though, I mean, I think part of it is the re-edit element of it, because he, the reason that the 1925 version that we have it at all is because it's rediscovered in like the 90s. He didn't want, once he made the 42 re-edit, he chucked out the 25 version. When he sold the studio in America, which is now the Jim Henson studio, when he sold that, he wanted everything, including the 25 version, like just destroyed and sold for scraps.
Huh.
And it was luckily there's a whole saga with this. Have you come across this, Glenn? The whole 2542 saga?
No, I know that the one that I just watched is 25.
So
because there's a whole disclaimer about it.
So basically, I'm going to forget the man's name, but the guy who owned the company that all of the film stock was sold to be destroyed was also a collector of film. And so this man actually kept the prints he could find, the remnants he could find of the Gold Rush, right? It wasn't complete. It was all cut up because obviously Chaplin used some of it to re-edit the film and all of that, but he assembled from the scraps a decent print, bootleg print, but a decent print of the silent Gold Rush. This would be whatever were it not for the fact that in addition to selling the studio, Chaplin had also let the copyright lapse. His attorneys had let the copyright lapse on the 25 Gold Rush. Because as far as he was considered, the 42 version was the official version. But by the time he's getting around to releasing what is the 42 version, there was also a guy with a relatively legal, in the US, copy of the 25 Gold Rush that he can also distribute and screen anywhere. So at a certain point, Chaplin is competing with his own movie. What ends up happening is he ends up in Europe. The Gold Rush was still under copyright, the 25 version. So he is able to sue this guy and get that taken out of distribution. Right? So we are not able to see, because of legal reasons, we are not able to see the Gold Rush for decades. And an official copy does not exist. It isn't until the 90s that people discover some of this work print, and a lot of work goes into kind of restoring this based on taking the 42 silent version and trying to restore the title cards and also restore footage that was taken out, going off of past scripts. There's a whole arduous process that goes into reclaiming this 25 version. But it is just fascinating to think that, the 25 version in which you watched it, I think all of us watched in some degree in prep for this, comes from a place of actually having to basically rebuild this a la the, longer cut of von Stroheim's Greed or something, especially because this is a film that's so readily in the public domain that I think most of us, the first time we saw it, was either like a YouTube rip or a cheap bootleg DVD or something. But the fact that this was so hard to see until basically the year it gets inducted into the registry is a fascinating thing. There was only the 42 version with the voiceover. But, I did want to also note one other thing that I think is super interesting with all this. So we acknowledged a little bit Georgia Hale, right, who plays the lead female in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia Hale, a thing that I do think is interesting about her, beyond the fact that she and everybody else, obviously, Glenn, you acknowledged, Big Jim, Max Swain, was in previous Chaplin films. There are a couple people who were in previous Chaplin films. But from Georgia Hale on out, most of the people in this movie don't look like people who typically appear in Chaplin films. He wanted, and he did that on purpose. He said he didn't want anybody in this film to be a caricature. He wanted everybody in the Gold Rush to feel like they would have appeared in a stereograph of the Klondike. And so when you see Georgia Hale in this film, I think she feels, and I don't mean this in any way, it's not a matter of prettier or taller, or but she just feels different. She has a distinct feel from the other love interests in Chaplin films.
Well, it's the thing we mentioned before. This is, all of his movies tend to be city set stuff. Modern day cityscape, all whatnot. A very different vibe, populace wise, than what's going on in this movie. Just by sheer storytelling, they're gonna have to look different and feel different than anybody else that's been in his past movies. Which is, it's good to have a different flavor, and it's good to like know that he was aware enough to lean into that. But I feel like it was always going to have to be different, just based on what he was going for.
Really interesting about this is he has said that he based a lot or all of those early female roles in his films on Hetty Kelly, who he was never able, like, he never had a relationship with her. I think he said he maybe talked to her 5 times, which is a really, in his personal life, a very weird thing that he was hung up on this. And a lot of the story of the tramp in these films with women is a very similar thing. He sort of pines for them from afar. And then the first time he gets the girl, maybe the only time, it's like you're saying, it's a completely different type.
Yeah.
It's not the type that we've seen before that's based on this real woman that he couldn't have.
And I think, the other thing with Georgia Hale that I think is so interesting, at least for me as a curio, is Georgia Hale, Chaplin is able to, he's noted for the fact that he commits like a son of a gun to keep making silent films in the sound era, in the talkie era. He's a valiant warrior for that. Georgia Hale was an actress who could not make the transition to sound. It didn't happen for her. She had come to Hollywood. I think she'd won a beauty contest. She's one of those stories, right? And she works with a number of these people, and she gets these roles. And she just, within 3 years of this film, just has no more career. And yet lived until the 80s. Was still around, wrote books, wrote a memoir about working with Chaplin, was interviewed on film about it, but just, it didn't come together for her, despite being in, the Gold Rush, working with Chaplin. She's also in, just on a side note, she's in maybe my most obsessed over lost film, which is the first ever film adaptation of The Great Gatsby. Was in 1926, just a year after this. And I believe it was...
Did it have Jay-Z on the soundtrack?
It did not. It did not.
Okay, well then obviously why do I care?
But it stars Warner Baxter as Jay Gatsby, and it's got a pretty stacked... William Powell is in it, and Georgia Hale plays... why am I blanking on her name now? Is it Myrtle? The woman at the gas station that Daisy's husband is having the affair with.
Can't remember off the top of my head.
We all know the book. Somebody will yell at me in the comments for this.
Do you think she ever talked about being in that one and then seeing the Robert Redford one in the 70s? Do you ever think, was that in her memoir? Maybe whatever.
I would be fascinated because there was also another one. There was a 1940s Great Gatsby. Whose lead I completely forget. I think it might have been the guy who's the lead in the Blue Dahlia. I'm completely blanking. But there's this fascinatingly weird 26 Great Gatsby, which is other than William Powell, who plays Daisy's husband, basically everybody in this 1926 Great Gatsby. Well, Warner Baxter has a bit of a career after that. I mean, he wins the Oscar for the Cisco Kid, but it is packed with a lot of people who kind of don't make it out of the sound era. Which is it's truly like if everybody who starred in The Rules of the Game didn't make it to the color era. You know what I mean? It's just a very energy.
It's basically Singing in the Rain, It was a tough transition for a lot of people. Some people didn't do it. You said she lived to the 80s?
At least 1980, Georgia Hale.
Do you think she saw Cruising?
Glenn, I know you've only been on films. This is a bit this is unfortunately not our fault. This is a Patrick Kotner problem. Because anytime Patrick is on our show, he measures the length of an actor's career by what Star Wars film they could have lived to see. That's the only manner in which he measures.
Well, just also in this case, just when you think about actors that were making silent movies, and to see that they lived to the 80s or the 90s or whatever, and you're just wow, imagine seeing what your industry became in your old age. Like, like that's why it's like, imagine seeing Cruising.
Well,
like you made The Gold Rush and you see the movie where Al Pacino's fisting guys at
well, I
bars.
think the thing I always think of instead is just like,
Come
but like
on.
Tom, you and I always talk about this, like the insanity of. We talked about it this season actually on Night of the Hunter. When you look
Did
at
we?
like we not Cruising, what we talked about on Night of the Hunter is the fact that Lillian Gish is in Night of the Hunter, right?
Mhm.
Lillian Gish is in Night of
Yeah.
the Hunter, and when you watch Night of the Hunter, people seeing Night of the Hunter in the 50s were probably like, "Oh, wow, that's that lady who was in D.W. Griffith pictures." Now, obviously, she's an old woman, but it's nice to see her get like one last juicy role. And then she continues doing parts in movies through to the 80s, which, to tie it back to our earlier point, Lillian Gish started making movies for D.W. Griffith, right? She is in
Yep.
Intolerance and Birth of a Nation. And her last starring role was viewed as it came out in the White House by Ronald Reagan. That
Again
Whales of
with
August,
fucking Reagan.
because I'm bringing it around, Thomas.
I know,
But like
I know.
the whales,
I
that
know.
movie you're talking about, the Whales of August. That's like, what is it? It's Lillian Gish, Betty Davis, and Vincent Price. That is an insane.
That's a murderer's
thing to
row.
think. Like
That's a murderer's row.
But it's also truly wild. I've seen clips of that movie. It is genuinely wild to watch a movie with, yeah, sure, none of them are young, but like Betty Davis, Vincent Price, and Lillian Gish. And if you pointed a gun at me and said, which one of these people's about to die? I'm not picking Gish. It's very weird. But yes, Georgia Hale lived until 1980. And we've again talked about her experience with Chaplin. It's just strange to think, again, like this is, we're remarking on the Gold Rush and saying like how it starts this run because we talk about City Lights, Modern Times, all of that, right? And when people talk about like the great Chaplin films, they tend to bring up, obviously, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator, these silent or quasi-silent films past the time of sound. It is just kind of crazy to think, like, obviously we talked about The Kid, we talked about Dog's Life, but the Gold Rush, when people talk about it as the start of that like great, Chaplin run, the Gold Rush and the Circus are the only two of those like quintessential Chaplin features that actually come out in the silent era. This is one of the only times of those kind of masterwork feature films that he isn't rowing against the current, which I think is wild to think about,
Yeah.
And even,
I mean, I guess, I don't know. That's a weird thing with him, man. Like, it's hard to explain. Just like, there's really no equivalent to anything like that today, really. I mean, I guess the closest thing you would get is like, I don't know, like Cameron and Ang Lee still trying to like do the high frame rate thing when everyone's just like, no, we gave this a shot. We don't like this. Leave us alone. Just make your movies.
well,
But even that's not like really the same thing.
because that wasn't like that wasn't the moment, that wasn't the thing. I mean,
because that wasn't the only way films were being made. Like that's what I'm saying. Like it's so weird for just like a fundamental way of filmmaking just stops. But then he just is just like, well, no, I'm just gonna keep doing that. And everyone's like, all right, I mean, if they're good, I guess we'll keep seeing them, but it's weird, Chuck.
And I think it's interesting, too, because, truthfully, the Gold Rush, even though this is during his silent era, this is also, I would argue, and Glenn, you could disagree. Obviously, you and I, you've rewatched them all recently as well, but, like, this also feels like, even though, sync sound is not really a thing yet, this feels like the first one where he's building a film in a way that, like, if he could have sound, he wouldn't necessarily have dialogue, but you feel in some of the moments, particularly the New Year's Eve sequence, right? With the Old Lang Syne sequence, right? Mm-hmm. And all of those shots of those sad faces and the old man, or some of the melancholy, some cheerful, and the old man singing. You can almost feel in the way that is shot and the way that is cut together, you can feel him editing to the rhythm of music he doesn't have. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, it feels like, because like we said, this is the first one he kind of prepped from the beginning and wasn't just winging it as he went. So it has that feel of like, not to be like a backhanded to his other movies, but like it kind of feels like a real movie, where it's like built from the ground up and not just winging it. So yeah, you could see, which I mean leads me to a question, honestly. Which version do you guys prefer? 27 or 42?
25 or 42?
25 or 42, excuse me.
I mean, I'll let you take that one first, Glenn. I have to think about it a moment, unless you need to think about it as well. But
I haven't, before I rewatched everything, I hadn't watched these probably since I was in my 20s, and I don't know that I remember 42 to be able to make that comparison, because I watched this so long ago. Because one of the reasons why I was so excited to do this was because I could revisit this as an adult after like so many years. It honestly was like a gift to me to be able to do that. I really enjoyed going through them again.
So I'll let you think a little more, Mike. Because for me, it's the 42 version. I think I prefer, mainly because, like what we were saying, having the sound and having him doing the voiceover and basically giving dialogue to the characters, trimming some of the fat out. It's got a better pace, I think. Yeah, because I don't think the movie needs to be more than 72 minutes. And even then, like I said, it feels still like it could be trimmed a little bit, but like it's got the energy, it's got the sound and the dialogue, and yeah, I just think it feels a little more vital, vibrant. I don't know what I would say, but I think that's kind of my preference with it.
I appreciate having the 42 version. I think there's some interesting differences, and we'll get into a little more of that before we wind down. But because in the 42 version, I think Chaplin, his voiceover tries to add some moments there. The moment in the cabin, right? When that's not helpful at all. When she shows up with her friends, right, and she's like kind of fucking with him and being like, "Oh, we'll come see you later, right? We'll come see you on New Year's."
So mean.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. So in the silent version, it's really mean, right? It's really mean-spirited. And you're like, oh, this poor dupe. In the 42 version, in Chaplin's voiceover, he has the line, "And what if she were fooling him? He was enjoying the warmth of her attention." So he kind of takes this scene that in the silent version just feels mean, and he's basically not negating the cruelty, but he is kind of adding an element to the Tramp of like, and the Tramp is he's basically saying like the Tramp thinking to himself like, so what if she is fucking with me? Like I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying attention.
I don't buy that for a second.
But I think that is why, to the question of which I prefer, I enjoy watching the 25 version more as a whole. I appreciate the 42 version, and I was texting Tom as I was rewatching it of the idea of like, it is wild to consider. I mean, like this, there were kind of like attempts to revive the silent with talking. Like, I know Harold Lloyd did like 2 compilations of his films that were like him. I think they were called like, they were god awful titles too. I think like one of them was just like The Wacky World of Harold Lloyd, or some of those. There would be those of like, can we edit together silent films with like a voiceover? But none are done with the same kind of like tender care of the 42 Gold Rush. And I do wonder if more had been done that way, would they find a newer audience, right? But I think my relationship to the 42 version is akin to the Giorgio Moroder version of Metropolis, which is when I was a kid, I remember like my dad had bought, because he found him at Best Buy. It was like in the early days of DVD. They had the original Metropolis and the Giorgio Moroder cut on like 2 different DVDs. And he bought them because he was like, I remember seeing clips of this a lot, and this would be cool to watch. And again, I was like 12 years old, maybe 11 years old, that original Metropolis was tough to get through. Just because there's a big barrier when it's like a 3+ hour silent German film, as impressive
you
as it
don't
is visually.
say.
Like, when you're a young kid, I
Yeah.
feel like silent dramas are tougher than silent comedies, especially at that length.
Yeah.
When I watched the Giorgio Moroder cut, that unlocked the movie for me, and I fell in love with it. But that allowed me and helped me watch the original Fritz Lang Metropolis, and now that's the only way I want to watch Metropolis. It's as though like that was. I guess the only way I can sort of compare it in a way is like it's almost like if there's a book that you've been trying to read forever. I know people who had this with Lord of the Rings. I know some people who had this with Dune. I'm sure we can all name it with some book, but like a book that like you're supposed
50
to enjoy,
Shades of Grey.
that you pick up and you look at, you've tried to read like 3 or 4 times. It's a classic, and you just can't get there. And when you watch the movie, and that like helps guide you through the story and takes you through it in 2.5 hours or whatever, you can then finally go back and get through and appreciate the book. And finally, it unlocks something for you. It helps kind of provide that study guide. That's me with the Moroder cut, and I think that's me with the 42 version. I much prefer watching the 25. I mean, I appreciate everything about the edit. I think it's fascinating to watch the 42 version. I like watching the 25 cut more, but I do think that the 42 cut unlocks things about that original version that I would not have maybe accessed otherwise, I mean, even to the point where, like, to bring it back to something we were talking about early on, at some points during that 42 cut, Chaplin is, like, vocally pointing out little bits and little comedy shtick that you might not even notice if you're just watching the 25 version on its own. Just little ticks that he's doing and everything, which I think is terrific. But
Cool.
Yeah, I also wanted to touch a little bit on, obviously we talked about things like the dinner roll dance and all of that, but there are just let's just talk about it. I mean, that is the scene. The dinner roll dance was such a hit when it happened that audiences, I believe at the German premiere, let me retake. Audiences, yes, audiences at the German premiere were riotously laughing so hard at the dinner roll dance that they demanded that the film be rewound and shown again. They asked for an encore of a movie scene, which, like, that was, that wouldn't be the only time that happened. We talked about with the Great Train Robbery, how the gunshot scene that we now commonly see at the end, the close-up gunshot, like they do in Goodfellas and all, audiences would, depending on audience reaction, they would either put that at the beginning or the end. I think the 1910 Uncle Tom's Cabin, some theaters, the river chase was so entrancing and enthralling that some theaters were just like, fuck it, we're just going to play it again at the end. We're just going to give it to you a second time because you guys liked it so much. But yes, the fact that scene killed like it did, despite being such a little moment, and I do think that, like, we talked about the Roscoe Arbuckle version of it, right? I do think that is one of those cases where, because that dinner roll scene is built within the context of the Little Tramp, who we empathize with, that's what this character is there for, the Little Tramp within this fantasy sequence of how do I entertain these women, right? These women that are so high above me, I don't even have words to express the feelings that I have, right? It takes what could be a fun gag, right, in any other movie, like a one-off gag, and it elevates it. It gives it pathos, and it gives it an extra dimension that I think in some senses, when you watch those kind of like movie history documentaries and they only show you him doing the dinner rolls sans context, and they kind of go like, This is one of Chaplin's most beloved bits. You kind of like see it out of context and go,
yeah,
the bar was set low for humor at 25. You know, and that happens with a lot of these too, you know. I mean, I could say that for Harold Lloyd, you know, that to a lesser degree, but like Harold Lloyd dangling off the clock, or even more so with the Freshman. If they show you the scene of him with the football, right, on the football field, you know, in the game, if you don't have the context of the rest of that movie, you're just like, I guess it's funny that he's dodging those tackles. I guess I can't really sure, you know. But that's, I think the dinner roll is a really good example. And there's obviously, like we talked about, there's other films of his before that. But I do think like the dinner roll scene is a perfect example of how the Gold Rush is arguably the first of his films where the context of the film matters to the gags. You know, I don't know if you feel, I mean, I'm sure there's examples before that too, but I think this is the one where it's really like, it's so cohesive.
I that goes to what Tom said before. Like, he's remembered as a comedian, but he's not great because he's funny. He's great because there is like something else going on there. Like, there's a reason he was the most famous person in the world. And I love that story about the dinner roll. They made them wind it back because I don't understand why it's so good, but I know that when I watch it, I feel every time I watch it, I am affected by it in that way where I understand why people love it, but I can't answer it even for myself. Because that's what I said before. What is he even doing? But there's almost a mystery to why it's so good. It's like that scene should be studied.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what it is. I just know that it clearly affected everyone who saw it.
And I think, you know, and that's true for a number of bits in this film. Like, obviously, we've seen, I mean, you know, it's not like a lot of films or cartoons are doing the dinner roll dance, right? Or anything like that. But, you know, I mean, The Simpsons does have Grandpa Simpson do the dinner roll dance at one point, which always on board for Abe Simpson. But think about the shoe eating sequence, right? I think the shoe eating sequence, we've certainly seen a million comedies and cartoons make a lot of hay out of, you know, oh, we got nothing to eat, so we'll just eat something that isn't food. We'll eat shoe leather. We'll eat our hat. We'll eat whatever. But when you watch the entirety of the film, right, it earns so much more and it plays so much better, not just in the delicacy with which the tramp prepares the shoe and splits up the shoe and eating the lace like, you know, spaghetti. But
on the nail.
Yeah. But the other element that I think is so great is that for up until this point in the film, Big Jim is the ultimate like tough guy, right? Big Jim is the guy who gives off the vibe of, I'd eat nails for breakfast because fuck you, right? And then it comes down to the shoe sequence and he is so miserable about it. It's so funny that like that in that moment when Chaplin's just, you know, oh, we're going to prepare the shoe, and then the relish with which the tramp kind of twirls the shoelace in his like spaghetti, and they have Big Jim reacting with just absolute. In that scene, the dynamic suddenly becomes like Big Jim is the skipper and the tramp is Gilligan. You know what I mean? Where he's just.
That is the scene where I wrote down in my notes, I love Max Wayne in this movie.
He's
exact moment.
He's so funny. By the way, that was made of licorice, apparently. That was...
Yeah, then he gets sick.
Yes.
From eating it, doing too many takes.
Max Wayne? Yes. He apparently told Chaplin, he was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Which again is just so funny that it makes you feel like, in some senses, the disdain on his face for the little tramp, probably method acting on the part of Swain. Probably a part of him that just... Now, apparently, like, by the time he's doing the Gold Rush, it should be noted, like, Swain's career was on the downswing at this point. Chaplin did him a solid by putting him in this film, and apparently was always trying to do him a solid. To toward the end of his life, Chaplin apparently like used money to set Swain up with a restaurant, which is great. I don't know where the restaurant was, but truth be told, that's a whole rabbit hole I could go down, is Los Angeles adjacent restaurants run by former stars. There's more than you'd think. Al Lewis had one. Don't know if you know that. Grandpa Munster had a restaurant that I believe he called Gramps, because that was legally distinct from Grandpa. Because if he called it Grandpa, that would be infringing on his Munsters character. But Gramps is up for grabs. So Los Angeles is a fascinating city. In any event.
Talkie, Charles.
The only other thing, it's really, it's a little thing, but we were talking about favorite bits. This is the kind of thing, like, it could have been in any Chaplin comedy, but again, it works so well here, is just when he goes into town and he's trying to raise money, so he's shoveling out snow by shoveling it away from one door in front of the next one, so he can just keep bilking the businesses until he gets to the jailhouse, and that's when he hightails it the hell out of there.
Yep.
Phenomenal bit.
Yep. A-cab, baby.
And the only other thing that's worth noting is, I don't know the release order, but in the timeline we recorded this, we just did an episode on the Bank Dick with W.C. Fields.
Hell
Ben, have
yeah,
you ever
we did.
seen the Bank Dick? Okay.
No.
First of all, I'm gonna say, well, congratulations to you, and my apologies to anybody else in your life that ideally we've just pushed you down a W.C. Fields rabbit hole. You're going to have a great time, but it does mean talking about a bunch of comedies from the 30s and 40s that everybody else will look at you and go, are you a grandpa? But Tom and I have both taken that journey. We're now both deep on Fields. Anyway, the one thing I will say is, Tom, do you not think it's weird that we've done two movies back to back that basically have the same ending? Which is
it's fun. I was thinking of it before, where it literally just makes it where, oh yeah, everything just works out, and he just gets a ton of money just because he was there.
The Bank Dick, Glenn, for context, is like just this guy getting up to antics, shit going wrong from the whole time. Everybody hates him, his life sucks, and then in the end, people are just like, oh, he has millions of dollars, and then he just struts around in a fur coat with cigars.
But he's still a fat, drunk bastard at the end of the day. No matter how much money he gets, he's just a dude who likes to drink and be a dude.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more relatable in my opinion of just being a drunk dude.
Please, Glenn, go watch The Bank Dick. It's I can't recommend it enough. It's a delight. It's very weird. It's very good. But yes, it is. I do think that's interesting, just in terms of, like, obviously Chaplin's later comedies, like Modern Times, like The Great Dictator, they are more socially conscious, right? They are more, City Lights doesn't end with, City Lights is almost in contrast to this, right? City Lights is the tramp being mistaken for a millionaire, right? And then having to recover, whereas this movie ends with him being a millionaire, mistaken for a tramp, mistaken for a stowaway. His more socially conscious films are obviously more critical of wealth, but I do love that this one ends in the kind of what feels like the traditional,
It is very un-Chaplin ending.
Yes, but also like what audiences would have wanted then, right? Which is the little guy gets one over, right? Which I think is it's just interesting to see that, because he's never going to end it like that again. He's never, even if there's, City Lights has a melancholy ending. Modern Times has a melancholy ending. The Great Dictator, of course, has, that rousing speech and that moment of hesitation. And, well, Monsieur Verdot and Limelight are not exactly cheering anybody up by the end, Not exactly upbeat pictures.
No. Limelight,
I love Limelight.
But I feel it's like it bums me out so hard that he was like a shithead in this one aspect of his life, because that movie is filled with wisdom, in a way where you can feel it's coming directly from him as a person. and it's so sad and brilliant. I love how it's like essentially him reminiscing on like being a clown and losing the ability to be a clown, but also making this incredible piece of art about how he can't be a clown. It I don't know. That movie hits me on multiple levels.
I wonder too, and this is probably where I'll start winding down, but I wonder too, we're talking about those later Chaplin films, like City Lights, like Modern Times, and all the way through to Limelight. And sure, we'll throw in King in New York. And I'm going to go ahead and pretend that's where his career ended. So we don't.
I didn't like that. I don't like that movie
King
at
in
all.
New York?
King in New York. I don't know. I couldn't do it.
I would rather pretend that's his last film than acknowledge Countess from Hong Kong. So
it's like I get where he's coming from 100%. He has a bone to pick, and I don't begrudge him that because he's right. But as a film, it doesn't work.
I'm going to say it again. Better than Countess from Hong Kong. That's all I'm saying. That is, I own it. It's unwatchable. But the one thing I will say with that is that those other films, and even like we said, King of New York, those are all coming from him from the start, right? And they're coming from an organic place of like, I have something I want to say. I want to explore a theme. The thing that's interesting about the Gold Rush is its genesis point is, Tom, did you happen to come across like where this came from, the Gold Rush?
No, I did not.
Well, I think you'll enjoy this because one thing you and I do like to talk about sometimes, we were talking about earlier today, is when it comes to the subject of Charlie Chaplin, one great thing to talk about is his dear friendship with Douglas Fairbanks and how much that annoyed Douglas Fairbanks' wife, Mary Pickford, who really did not like anything you hear about Pickford talking about Chaplin. It has the real energy of like, that's like, you'll read biographies, about them where it'll be like, well, they were all friends, but Pickford's always like, that's Chuck. Doug really liked having him around. I kind of told Doug to stop having him around so much. So the genesis of this I thought was interesting. So Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks collected like stereoscopes, right? The old kind of those things you'd have them on a stick, and like there'd be two pictures, and when you looked at them, they were like a 3D image, right? They collected those. One day, Chaplin came over to Pickfair because Chaplin would just show up at Pickfair, and he should be there for like an hour, and then if he didn't want to leave, Douglas would never throw him out, so he would just hang out as long as he wanted. Anyway, he's in the library, and Fairbanks is showing him slides for the stereoscope. And it turns out that Fairbanks had a collection of ones of the Gold Rush in the Klondike. And he showed Chaplin one image, and Chaplin became so transfixed by this image of this like line of men climbing the mountain.
I love that shot.
That's in the movie. He replicates that stereoscope in the movie. He became obsessed with it, and he apparently hung out at Pickfair all day just going through this collection of Klondike photographs. So Mary Pickford, in an audio interview I was listening to, said, well, Chaplin actually got the idea for his film at Pickfair, going through our collection. And because it's Mary Pickford and she had some disdain for Chaplin, it's very funny to hear her go, Chaplin, one of his pictures, I don't know, what was it? The Snow Klondike, one of those. And then you hear the interviewer go, you mean the Gold Rush? Like she's like, he's sitting going, you mean one of the greatest films ever made? And she's like, I don't know, some bullshit with the snow. You know how he did that crap. But I think that's interesting, not just because it gives us, as we're talking about that great opening shot, that these men out in the snow who were apparently, as the cinematographer described it, and this is their terminology, we grabbed 500 hobos.
Mm-hmm.
Filmmaking was real different back then.
Was it?
I just saw
'Cause, didn't they just do that on Son of Soul?
Well, it's true, but I just grabbed. I saw a tweet today that talked about that. They're like, watching movies from the silent era is so interesting because you'll watch a guy being attacked by lions as a train goes over a bridge and go, "How'd they do that?" And it turns out they had a guy attacked by lions and sent a train over a bridge. They just didn't care. But not only do you get that, but I think all of the other Chaplin films we're talking about come from a place of like, I have a message I want to convey, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least of like the features. The Gold Rush seems like the only one that came out of like, I want to do something in this setting. And the theme kind of comes out of that. The idea, the plot kind of comes out of that. So I think it just is such an interesting, occupies such an interesting place in his filmography. Now,
surreal.
Now, Glenn, I want to just before we went down, you said this is your favorite film, but you don't think it's his best, right?
Yeah, I don't know what I would say his best is, but maybe Modern Times. Maybe it probably wouldn't be this one because I think he probably was, honing his craft, and those later films, I appreciate the messages in them. There's something about this one though that just appeals to me on like as a kid. Like it's almost fantastical. It's whimsical. It's just fun.
So, with all that being said, we're going to play a fun game here in terms of we already know, but let's see if Tom remembers. Tom, how do you think The Gold Rush fared at the Academy Awards in its release years?
0 in the first release and 2 in the second release.
That is correct. Mostly because the first release, the Oscars didn't exist yet. So,
well,
there were no
lucky
Academy
me,
Awards
I
in
did
the
not
first
do
year.
that math.
Good reason.
In the second year, that's true. It was re-released for sound in 1942. It was nominated for Best Score, which it lost to Now Voyager.
Of course.
And it was nominated for Best Sound Recording, which it lost to Yankee Doodle Dandy, which we'll be doing Yankee Doodle Dandy, I think, next season on the show. And it is genuinely wild thinking of those movies and just imagining The Gold Rush was in theaters at the same time, like a re-release of The Gold Rush. For context, the Best Picture nominees that year for the re-release were The 49th Parallel. Weirdly, I forgot about this. King's Row, The Magnificent Ambersons, The Pied Piper, The Pride of the Yankees, Random Harvest, The Talk of the Town, Wake Island, Yankee Doodle Dandy, and the winner, Mrs. Miniver. So, just kind of nuts for a number of reasons to look at that and think, number one, you could have gone to the theater and seen Pride of the Yankees or a re-release of The Gold Rush. Those feel like centuries apart in some senses, those movies. But more importantly, think about this way. In 1942, Charlie Chaplin has taken a film of his that he was like, I didn't really have I didn't know what I was doing on Gold Rush. I'm going to re-edit this, and I'm going to re-release it so people can see, my definitive vision of this film of mine. And he does that in 1942, the same year Orson Welles has lost all control of the Magnificent Ambersons and is probably thinking, oh, well, I'm sure I'll get to give them my cut one day, just like Chuck did. I'm sure I'll get to do my re-release of Amberson someday. That won't be lost forever. And that worked out, right? We got the definitive Ambersons, right?
Yeah, it came out on Criterion a few years ago. It was pretty great.
Yeah. That was the A&E miniseries, right? That's exactly how Orson would have wanted it, right? The A&E. You still haven't seen the A&E miniseries of Ambersons, have you, Tom? The one that's based on Orson's shooting script?
No.
It's a weird thing.
Do you guys hang out? Like, what's this dynamic? What goes on?
So you want the honest answer? The honest answer is that when it's just Tom and I, the conversations are far more civil. But when we're on mic for this show, there is a little bit of like there's almost an energy of like big brother, little brother of Tom just being like, "Don't embarrass me. Don't let people know.
No, it's honestly, it's more just like he's making me do this fucking show, and I'm gonna do my best and say some smart things, but also I'm gonna take the piss out of it
Yeah.
because I don't want to fucking be here.
Yeah, that's. You know what the thing is, Tom? Again, you always say that, like, I don't want to be here. It's been 4 years. You've been doing
I
this
know.
for
What else do I have to do? I don't have a fucking girlfriend. I got nothing better to do on a Friday night than talk to you fucking jerks.
Well,
Not you, Glenn. You're great. I mean this jerk, and then the little boy that's producing the show. Because much like Chaplin, we have a boy way too young doing work for us.
you know, and that is important to mention because, you know, as we move to plugs, obviously, you know, I want to talk about what you're working on now, Glenn, but it is worth noting, and I may have mentioned this the last time you were on, but Tom, you know, who is a professional writer, it is worth noting one of the first things that he ever wrote in print was a review of a project of yours. So it is a nice little full circle thing. You had an animated show that he got to he reviewed and interviewed you for our college magazine newspaper. It was the college newspaper, because I ran the entertainment section, but I was like, I want to talk about this in the newspaper, but I feel like if I had you and I do a conversation, it would just be, I don't know how productive that would be, because it would just be a lot of me going, and you remember that thing where you did the thing? Yeah, it wouldn't be particularly good. I think I was also, no, I wasn't in the series at that point. I did do a voice role in that series toward its very end. It's worth noting.
That is correct.
I had 2 lines of dialogue, and that's more than anybody should ever let me act. So it was very kind of you to do that. But enough about what you were working on back when Tom and I were in college. What are you working on now? What do you want to plug? Let folks know what you got going on.
All right, I guess so. The first one, I finished my first feature-length film edit last year. It's called Keeper of the Bay. It's an environmental documentary. Filmmaker is Ashley LaFaso. She's amazing. And we just got picked up by PBS Hawaii. So you can watch the film through their website. I'm also, right now, for my job, I'm cutting a true crime series. Right now we're on an episode about Joel Rifkin. So that's a thing. You can catch Crime Files on News 12.
And do you have anything? Do you want to plug any socials, anything like that, or are you all square with that?
Nah, nobody needs to.
We all work in media to one degree or another, so yeah, we probably shouldn't tell people our social media.
Yeah, I mean, I just in general, ignoring all of that, I just leave me alone.
Well, Glenn, thank you so much for joining us. We hope to have you back on again. But everybody else, stick around. We'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
Alright, so for my pick, I found a comedy that I am very surprised is not in the registry, from an iconic comedian making his debut in the cinema world. Was an icon before jumping into the movies, became an icon in the movies. His big breakout, in many ways, might be his best movie. It's slapstick funny, it's dopey, it's goofy, it's just a wild, funny fucking movie. About a very kind of a trampish, but in this actor's silly way character, making his fortunes on accident, and having a love story involved. And it's I think they're very similar in some like there's similarities, but in terms of execution they're very different. But I think the double feature would be great. Again, shocked it's not in the registry. My pick is The Jerk. I could see Mike's face, and he's like, "It's not in the registry."
It's partly that, and partly I just thought you were going everything you said in the run up. I thought you were going in a very different direction with a movie, so I was just like, oh, okay.
Well, yeah, I thought The Jerk would be a good pick. Steve Martin, I think, needs to be represented in the registry, even though, like, you know, there's not going to be too many you could honestly say deserve to be in it. But The Jerk is one of those landmark comedies, one of the high points of the 70s comedy scene, and a great intro to him into cinema. So with the similarities involved with the Gold Rush and The Jerk, very different execution styles, but I think they work very well together. And again, just surprised The Jerk's not in there. So my pick is going to be The Jerk.
And both have a dog, so you know.
Hey, listen, we love a dog.
By the way, the dog in the Gold Rush, I will just note, the dog in the Gold Rush was in a shelter, not a shelter, a dog pound. They picked up the dog that day for the shoot and loved it so much it just lived on the Chaplin studio lot for the rest of its life.
Awesome,
right?
That's great.
I thought for a minute when you were doing the whole run up of like they got their start, before movies and they're doing all this, and then for some reason I'm just like, I feel like he's going 48 hours. Sounds like he's going 48 hours. Sounds like he's going 40. And then in the end, when you're like, well, he makes his fortune, I'm like, I guess, sort of. And then, yeah, when you said The Jerk, that's why I made that face. Because this whole time I was like, yeah, okay, 48 hours. He's doing 48 hours. Doing 48 hours. And then, no, not at all. Okay, great. So my pick, I alluded to it in the episode itself, in the conversation.
It's another 48 hours.
My pick, I alluded to it in this show, but it is a fascinating companion piece of the Gold Rush. It comes out 3 years earlier and is just an outright comedy with no heart. Some would say almost anti-heart.
Hell yeah.
Also because the movie is anti-heart. In this case, anti-William S. Hart. This is, The Frozen North, the Buster Keaton comedy from 1922, is not just a parody of William S. Hart, but a criticism. Because, and this is the fascinating little backstory to it, when Roscoe Arbuckle was going through his famous trial, one of the people who was most vocally critical of him in the press was William S. Hart, even though Hart didn't necessarily know Arbuckle that well, and certainly didn't know anything about the case. Keaton, who was one of Arbuckle's defenders, was obviously furious about this. Not to mention the fact that, at least according to some scholars, and I don't know, but William S. Hart had a reputation around Hollywood of being physically abusive toward women. Now, again, this is just what is alleged. I don't have the data there, but what I do know is that Keaton certainly felt that way and decided to make a film that was essentially deconstructing William S. Hart and criticizing William S. Hart in the same way that, like, it's not one particular film, but like many people would be critical of John Wayne in like the 80s and 90s, right? The Frozen North, as we alluded to in the show, a very black comedy parody of a Western, but is full of incredible gags. Instead of our hero arriving into town on a horse, he arrives because it's the last stop on the subway. And there's just a subway station sticking out of the snow. He decides to hold up a saloon because he sees a wanted poster of a bandit with a gun. So he just attaches the wanted poster to the window of the saloon, and he points everybody to the poster in the window and claims it's his partner outside with a gun. There's some just very funny bits. It's very uncharacteristic for Keaton. He's playing an outright villain, which you don't normally see. There's a lot more emotion in him than we know from old Stoneface. But it's essentially, I wish there was a better way to describe it, but it's essentially like the silent film version of a diss track. Like, it's truly just Buster Keaton having a feud with William S. Hart and doing it on film. Is the Frozen North necessarily like in the conversation alongside things like The General? I don't know. Some people absolutely love it. Other people find it very uncomfortable because of how dark it is. But I do think it's a fascinating aspect of Keaton's career. It's a remarkable contrast to the Gold Rush. But also I do think, the National Film Registry is about preserving our film culture and our film heritage. And I think being able to see something that is one movie star taking a shot at another is such a fascinating thing and not something you really see anymore. So I think it's remarkable in that regard. It's well worth preserving in that regard. It's also worth preserving as a great piece of Keaton comedy, a fascinating aspect of his career. It's co-directed by Edward F. Klein, who we just talked about with The Bank Dick. And it is, for all of its darkness, very, very, very funny. Even clocking in at just 18 minutes long. So my nomination for the registry is Buster Keaton's The Frozen North from 1922.
Next week,
the team of Hast and Swan join us to discuss Footlight Parade.
There isn't a cultural ick, particularly about your manhood, relative to musical theater yet, because I think it's newer, and the cultural notion that it's like for girls and sissies just hasn't been established yet.
You're Missing Out is a production of Neon Night Media. It's hosted by Mike Natale and Tom Lorenzo. The show is produced by Kyle Lampar and edited by Mike Natale and Kyle Lampar. More information about our hosts and guests are in the show notes. Thank you to Amanda Rush for our social media, and all of you for checking us out.
If you're listening right now or want to take the show on the go, every episode is available as an audio podcast. Follow You're Missing Out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave a review and a rating. It helps folks find the show.
Want to watch the show or watch some of the films along with us? Great, that's why we're doing this. Don't leave us alone out here. Check out our YouTube channel. We've got video versions of every episode, uploads of some of the National Film Registry titles we're discussing, commentary tracks, and live streams. And once a month, I'll be uploading some content that's exclusive to the YouTube channel. So be sure to click subscribe and hit that little bell to be notified as soon as new stuff goes up. Because, let's be fucking real, I ain't sticking to a goddamn schedule.
So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you next time.
And you'll see us next time. Because we don't watch you, you're watching us.